Sometimes, when a flight begins, everything seems normal, but within minutes, the lives of everyone on board can change. In 2018, Air India Flight 101 was preparing for a journey from Mumbai to New York. The plane was ready for the long-haul flight, and passengers were settling into their seats comfortably. However, what appeared to be a peaceful atmosphere in the cabin was about to shift dramatically due to an approaching storm. At first, the weather was just a light rain, but as the aircraft neared northeastern India, conditions rapidly worsened. Visibility decreased, and the rain turned into a full-fledged storm, with strong winds adding to the severity. The flight crew noticed the deteriorating conditions, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. Pilots are trained for such severe weather, but this was something entirely different. The storm intensified, and the weather became increasingly dangerous. The Instrument Landing System, ILS, a critical technology for safe landings in such conditions, suddenly malfunctioned. Zero visibility, system failure, and running low on fuel. No one knew just how thin the line between life and death was in that moment. With the ILS failure, the pilots had to navigate through worsening conditions without the usual guidance. The runway was impossible to spot, and they were flying blindly. The aircraft was flying at a low speed, but with each passing second, the situation grew more perilous. The passengers in the cabin were becoming more aware of the looming crisis, and tension was building. But the pilots weren't just facing a technical issue. They were carrying the responsibility for hundreds of lives. Every decision they made could make the difference between life and death. And in that moment, there was no clear solution. The weather was preventing any safe approach. Then, there was the looming issue of fuel levels. The plane's fuel was rapidly depleting, and the runway visibility remained zero. The pilots were faced with a tough decision: land at a nearby airport or continue hoping for better conditions. At around this point, the plane was 5 miles away from its intended landing site. The pilots had no choice but to make a split-second decision to turn toward an alternate airfield. But even this decision wasn't enough. The plane was running on extremely low fuel, making every passing minute more dangerous. The plane could plummet into disaster at any moment, but one person's decision could turn everything around. The pilots continued to receive frequent reports from the cabin crew, who were clearly aware of the severity of the situation. Some passengers had begun to discuss what would happen if the plane went down. A woman joked, "If this plane crashes, remember me." But the humor only added to the growing tension. However, the pilots did their best to remain calm. The aircraft was now dangerously close to the runway, but the visibility still didn't allow for a clear approach. The pilots knew that any wrong move could lead to a crash. The fuel alarms started to go off again, signaling that they were very close to running out of fuel. At this point, the plane was nearing a critical juncture. The decision to attempt a visual approach was the only viable option. But even then, the question remained: would they make it to the runway in time? Would they be able to land safely without running out of fuel? Every second felt like a ticking clock. Finally, the pilots made a critical decision. They aligned the aircraft for the final approach using only visual cues and radar as guidance. As the plane neared the runway, it started to shake violently, but the pilots held steady. Despite the storm and the fuel shortage, they managed to bring the plane in for a safe landing. A flight's end is more than just a successful landing. It's a story of saving lives. As the aircraft touched down safely, there was a moment of silence in the cabin. Passengers were in shock, but they were alive. At that moment, everyone on board realized that it was a miracle that they had survived. The pilots exchanged a quick glance. There was a sense of relief, but also shock. They had fought through the storm, the equipment failure, and the fuel crisis, and they had successfully landed the plane. But the magnitude of what they had just gone through was sinking in. The passengers disembarked, and for many, this would be a journey they would never forget. They realized just how fragile life can be, and how close they had come to disaster. The flight had started like any other, but in the end, it was a test of human will, professionalism, and courage. Sometimes, every second counts. The pilot's decisions and calmness saved not just the flight, but the lives of everyone aboard. A flight is often more than just a trip. It's a life-saving experience. If this story impressed you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramatic stories.